Well, one of the things I think is important is people don't realize that the reason that we had this passion for America is not only because we serve, but from that service, when we come home, we want all America can offer. We absolutely do. That's why when we were supporting things like the One Big Beautiful Bill, it was an easy example. I would tell people, we would be out in the field in the flight lines or all these different places that we serve, and we talk about this great American dream you want to come home to. We didn't talk about wanting more government or the government taking more taxes. We just thought about this great, big, beautiful nation we love and all I can do. People want to just come home. Some people just want to have a simple life and raise a family. Other people want to start businesses. Other people, one gentleman I know is now an international doctor who does brain surgery. He talked about wanting to do this as a young soldier in Panama. And it's the ability to do that is why it's great to work for America.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. So, what happens when a blue-collar Army veteran steps into the world of politics? Not with a political background, but with the voice and values of everyday Americans. Today's guest wasn't a lawyer, a doctor, or a career politician. In fact, his occupation title simply read common man. And that label stuck, not as a slight, but as a badge of honor to him. He gave passionate speeches, challenged the status quo, and pushed back against the big government solutions. After serving in the state legislature and holding local office, he made the leap to advocacy, fighting for veterans, liberty, and real policy change. Today, he wakes up every morning focused on moving the needle toward a freer, stronger America. We've actually had this guest on before to talk about Concerned Veterans for America's Vets on the Hill event that happened this past June. So I want to welcome back to the podcast Jimmie Smith to share his personal story of taking one small step to get involved. Jimmie, welcome back.
David, thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on here and, maybe share my story and hopefully motivate and, guide other people to get involved.
That's awesome. Yeah. So before we get, to your time in the Florida House and then with CVA, let's talk a little bit about your military career. How long did that last? And, why did you decide to serve in the first place? And where did you serve?
So as a young boy in Florida, we would run around the woods and play Army. And my heroes were Vic Monroe from Rat Patrol and Audie Murphy and John Wayne. And so at a young age of 17, I decided I wanted to live my childhood fantasy and join the Army. And they took me in. I dropped out of high school and joined the military because at that point you could. And I served 20 years in the United States Army, serving from Fort Lewis, Washington, which was a big jump from Florida, all the way over to Korea, Panama, and different units across the nation to include the infamous 101st and the very famous 82nd Airborne.
Wow. Yeah, those are certainly storied units. I mean, that's kind of some of the most famous places you could be in the Army in America.
Yeah, they were unique units because they really did teach you a lot in the ability to lead from the front. And I think that's probably one of the things I learned the most coming out of the military.
Yeah, that's so valuable. I love, we all work with a lot of folks as Concerned Veterans for America. And, I love seeing, obviously there's a lot of discipline that folks who are coming out of the military bring with them and apply to their life, but also the leadership qualities that people pick up and is instilled in them, and then they apply in their jobs. It's a pretty cool thing. I've always loved, I've interviewed a lot of people for different jobs, and when someone's coming out of the military, there's always some qualities that we always love to look for. So when you came back home, what made you want to get involved in politics and public service?
Well, actually, during my military time, I had started in the first Gulf War listening to our radio broadcast. So the military radio could be turned into like the BBC and things like that. And I would listen to the news because, well, let's admit it, we were part of it. And then from there, I started to get more and more interested in the world of politics and the direction the nation was going. So when I retired, I came home and really got involved with local politics, not intending to ever run. But then one day I was reading a newspaper and my predecessor in office explained that it wasn't a expenditure issue. It was a revenue issue. Now, I'm not one of these college degreed individuals, but in layman's term, he was saying we're not spending too much. We just need to tax more. And this was in 2010, right in the recession. And that whole philosophy was counter to the value I built throughout my years. So I decided, with very little experience, very little in the way of money to back myself, to throw my hat in the ring.
So did you go and talk to the local party? Did you just go and do it? Like, what was your process for taking that step?
Well, truthfully, this shows that even a novice can do something like this. I filed the papers and then started to talk to people about potentially running. And I did go to the party, who gave me a little advice, but truthfully, it was my local friends who believed in the same things I did and really want to get behind us. So it was more things like the young Republicans. And at that time, I was still young. And some of my local friends and local civic organizations that knew my passion for the community, the passion for the county as a whole, and then, of course, my passion for America.
So what was it like when you first ran for office? I mean, it had to be a very different feeling, but you be share with people what it's like to run for office.
Well, and some people think it's overwhelming, but the experience of being a paratrooper, jumping into a situation that you're really not aware of and trying to deal with it, really fit well for this, because all of a sudden I had to figure out how to get petitions signed. I had to figure out how to build a narrative to get people to support my effort to be elected. I had to figure out how to be able to debate an experienced political individual to be able to convince people I was the right person, even though this person had years of practice in public speaking. And it really was a lot of learning as I go. But the key thing for me was always the fact that you look at everything as an opportunity, right? So even if I would have lost, I never thought about it, but even if I would have lost, I was driving a narrative that I thought was going to be best for my community. I actually went and during the BP oil leak, considered something that is tragic in America's history for the environment in the state of Florida. I actually supported offshore drilling, and people would go, well, that's crazy. And then I would explain to them how, with a proper thought out process, we could establish regulations that would allow offshore drilling, but make it incredibly safer and less impactful on the environment. And when people say, well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I like the fact that you're thinking out an answer to an issue so that if it does happen again, you'll know there's ways to solve it before it ever becomes a problem.
Yeah, that's great. So set this up for us. Like, what year were you running? And were you running for the state house? Was that right? And then what part of Florida were you running in?
Yes, it was in 2010. I live in Citrus County, Florida. So we're at the bottom of what's called the Big Bend in Florida. On the West Coast, you have the Big Bend that comes all the way down and then straightens out and goes down into Tampa. So it's a relatively rural area. At that time, we had about 125,000 people in the county. So not a big county. The district covered both the county below us and the county above us. So it was actually 3 counties I would be representing. And fundamentally, the aspect of what the county is, we're a rural county that has grown to be somewhat of a retirement county. And understanding that really did help allow me to communicate with the people, because I grew up here. I knew a lot of them, but I also have lived away from the county and understood what it was that the impact of people coming into the county changed. And that allowed me to really have a dual aspect of communicating with people. I could talk to people who was historically here, but also just talk to people who had moved here 5 years ago and didn't know much about the county.
Yeah, that's a real advantage. So my understanding is that your job title was common man. So how did that come about, and how unique was that for you?
Well, so I came from a guard post on a nuclear plant when I decided to run. I, before that, did pest control and some other jobs, construction. And, between my term of service and getting elected, that's what I did, just regular blue collar jobs. Very proud of that, because the majority of my family all do blue collar jobs. Mm-hmm. So getting into the Florida House, whenever they would talk about issues that had to do with how they want to help people back home, quite often the Democrats would come out and say, well, we need to expand government. We need to put, more of this program out there to help people. And I would come out and I'd go, actually, no, the way you help people is by keeping more of their money in their pockets, by tax breaks, by allowing them to get into business on their own, making it easier for people to start their lives and start their businesses and move towards success. And the leadership in the Florida House didn't really start calling me the common man right away. It took a little time, but at some point they were like, you're Democrat dynamite or kryptonite. You're Democrat kryptonite, because every time they want to help the poor people, so to speak, you can come back and go, yeah, that's not how you help them. So that's how I basically became the common man. And on a whip card, which is the card they go around so they identify who to talk to about an issue and how to talk to them, I looked down at the card and it said doctors for others, lawyers for others, dentists and things like that. And then on mine, it said common man. And I could not have been prouder.
That's awesome. That's great that you actually got to see it. So tell me a little bit about your time in the Florida House. So you gave a passionate speech on the House floor, but ended up getting gavelled down. Like, what was that all about? And maybe tell us a little bit about your prouder moments or maybe interesting moments in the Florida House.
Well, so yes, I was a member of the House, but also at the same time, I did still have my job at the nuclear plant, and I was with the security element there, and I was part of the union for the nuclear security team. Now, as we're in the Florida House, they were doing legislation that said, we want to separate the contributions from union members to political campaigns unless they designate those monies go to that. And when the bill came to the floor is when I really identified, wait a minute, this affects me. And I went up to the then floor manager for the debate on the issue. I said, hey, I want to talk about this. And he's like, no, we have the people are scheduled. I go, no, I really want to talk about this. And they go, no, we have the people. I took out my union card. I said, I'm a union member. This bill affects me directly because I don't want my future opponents to use my union dues to campaign against me. And right away, they changed it. They absolutely said 100%, you can speak. I got on the floor, picked up the mic, started speaking, and people know me. I'm a little bit passionate. And out of my enthusiasm, I grabbed my cup with the union logo and I raised it high with pride. And right away, I heard a thunderous gavel being rapped on the dais and then being said, Representative Smith. Again, another gavel rap. I looked around because I didn't know where to look. And sure enough, it was the speaker who was gaveling me down. He goes, props are not allowed on the House floor. And so I quickly wrapped up the speech, sat down and thought, well, there's the end of my political career. Quickly, the speaker sent over a messenger and said, Speaker wants to speak to you. I was like, oh, yep, this is it. I'm done with politics. Got over there and he was emphatic. He was like, that was one of the best, most passionate speeches I've ever heard. I had to gavel you down. We got to follow the rules, but that was a wonderful speech. I walked away from that so confused, but it did then open the door to allowing me to have a strong voice on the floor, especially when it came to blue collar issues.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'm glad it turned out the right way. So while you're in the legislature, you're the vice chair and later the chair of the Veterans Military Affairs Committee. And you focus on making sure veterans, yourself a veteran, had opportunities over handouts. And why was that important to you?
Well, when I first got in, I had to admit I was status quo. I was like, hey, let's do all we can for veterans. And it tended to be more towards government. And then at one point, it clicked. Why is it government doing more for veterans in the way of giveaways and nice resolutions instead of creating the opportunities to come home and get jobs? Because let's admit it, veterans would rather come home and be able to pay for all this stuff themselves instead of come home and just be able to run in and get free stuff. That's not why we served. That's not the intention of people who come home and want their American dream is, their American dream is not based off of free stuff from the government. So I started working as the vice chair and then subsequently the chair to make it a jobs committee. By the time I became the chair, one of my favorite things to do was to kill bills that was basically giveaways for veterans.
That's fabulous. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just click into the thought like, well, we just got to give stuff for veterans because of their sacrifice and their service. And I mean, I think almost all Americans want veterans taken care of and to be rewarded for their service. I mean, our country wouldn't be what it is without it. But it's about how you do it. And I think what we've seen so often at the federal level is we end up with handouts or one-size-fits-all solutions that end up being government-centric and working for the people in government and not the people it's supposed to serve, in this case, veterans. And I think that's probably some of what your advocacy work has led to.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. At one point, I was talking to a group of individuals who were very much for less government, tax breaks, and all these other things. So I went and spoke to them. I said, who's for less government? Who's for tax breaks? I'm getting all these applause. Absolutely, absolutely. I said, who thinks we should do all we can for government? They all raised or for veterans, and they all raised their hands. Sure enough, I looked at them and go, you do realize you just contradicted everything you said, because your only answer right now is all we can do for veterans is more government. And the room got quiet. I said, how about doing less for veterans, less in the way of regulations, less in the way of barriers, less in the way of making them jump through hoops for success for them and their families. And at that point, the audience looked at each other and started to realize, hey, wait a minute, we're doing veterans wrong by going to government and say, give us more government. We should be saying, give us more opportunity. And opportunity means less barriers when I come home. So I'll give you an example. If a water purification specialist can drain water out of the ground, out in the middle of a swamp or the desert or whatever it happens to be, why do they need to go through additional training to go into an air-conditioned building to work on safe and secure area pumps that are clean and easy to use with all the resources available? It's not a hard transition, and there's no reason for them to go through additional schooling, certification, or regulations. They can get on the ground and learn that skill right there and then quickly be employed.
Absolutely. There's so many examples of that too. It's so frustrating. We spend unbelievable amounts of money and time to train our men and women in uniform to do various jobs, and it should be at a pretty high level. And then we treat them like they're barely trained when they come out into the workforce in civilian life. It's just so infuriating.
It is, and it can be different.
Sure, and we could accommodate that difference, but it just seems like we don't even take it into account barely. Hey, so you went from government to advocacy work. What was that transition like, and why'd you do it?
Well, for me, it was actually really easy because as somebody who's run for office and then as somebody who was in office, speaking in public is no problem. And as somebody who was in the military, having to go into a room of other leaders and assert myself to make sure that I was heard made it even easier. The only thing that was a little bit of a challenge was to get into advocacy. Sometimes you kind of have to hold back a little bit because I can be a little over enthusiastic. And I would walk into a room and just assume that my answers were going to be what you were going to listen to. I had to really go and fall back on the political side of things and debate and discuss and elevate the issues more than my passion. Let the weight of the issue carry the message. And that was one of the challenges of moving to advocacy, because even in office, you're basically driving the issue based on your passion. But now it was driving the passion based on the issue.
Well, so you advocate for veterans professionally now, as you know. I think it's probably awesome for you to wake up every day and know that you're doing that. So
well, actually,
go ahead.
Well, actually, David. And that's one of the things that quite often is people misconstrue. I don't advocate for veterans. I help veterans advocate for America, and that's a unique aspect to why I get up every day. Because people who do that, like myself and those in CVA, think about it. Every day we take the service that we served and continue it through the aspect of getting up and working for a better America. So I can hand down to my kids and my grandkids the ability to have a great and bright future in America.
Well, one of my favorite things about Concerned Veterans for America is that it's taking that veteran voice and that veteran experience and speaking to the issues that pertain to, making America great, with liberty, more freedom, more opportunity. And it's such a powerful voice because it's really credentialed. You know, it's a voice with a lot of credibility because it's folks who've stepped up and served our nation, or folks who've had family members who've done that.
Well, one of the things I think is important is people don't realize that the reason that we had this passion for America is not only because we served, but from that service, when we come home, we want all America can offer. We absolutely do. That's why when we were supporting things like the One Big Beautiful Bill, it was an easy example. I would tell people, we would be out in the field in the flight lines or all these different places that we serve, and we talk about this great American dream we want to come home to. We didn't talk about wanting more government or the government taking more taxes. We just thought about this great, big, beautiful nation we love, and all I can do. People want to just come home. Some people just want to have a simple life and raise a family. Other people want to start businesses. Other people, one gentleman I know is now an international doctor who does brain surgery. He talked about wanting to do this as a young soldier in Panama. And it's the ability to do that is why it's great to work for America, because let's admit it, we're probably the lead nation in giving people those opportunities, and veterans want that opportunity.
So to wrap up, what advice would you give someone who wants to take that one small step to get involved?
Well, my advice, first and foremost, is know what you're talking about when you get involved in politics, because the most important thing is to be able to be that subject matter expert, because the media is going to come after you, your opposition and all this. You have to be well versed. So it's like being in the military. Know all the manuals, know the operations order front and back, know the details, because at some point, somebody's going to do something like this and they're going to ask you questions and you're going to have to answer it. And we know veterans have a great deal of knowledge. They have a great deal of skills and ability, and they can answer questions. You just have to prep for the mission.
Awesome. Well, hey, Jimmie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story of service with us and your continued story of service. I look forward to talking to you some more in the future.
Thank you, David, and for America.
Amen. Well, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.